We are going to move over to the defensive side of the ball, discussing Michigan's transfers that they brought in. I want to start, I'm going to jump around a little bit only because the first guys I want to talk about are a bit of a package deal here. TJ Metcalf and Tevis Metcalf. They're not twins. One brother's a year older than the other, but both coming over from Arkansas, a pair of defensive backs. TJ started at safety last year for Arkansas. Tevis Metcalf is more of a corner, maybe a slot type guy who was a special teams ace and a guy that it seems like both these guys had a really good spring based on the intel from behind the scenes. I know both kind of flashed in the spring game. Tevis a little bit more because he played a little bit more, but let's start with these guys today. What do you think they're going to add to this roster, fellas?
Depth, and who knows how much they'll play, but they will be in the rotation, right? And maybe Tevis a little bit more. But I will say that they've been great fits from everything that we've heard from people in the building and people around the program. They said that these guys really bought into the culture, that they've been great locker room guys. So they needed depth there. There's no question about it. And to land the package deal was extremely helpful. And obviously special teams are huge too. So I think they will both contribute there. They need to pick it up on special teams a little bit this year. Last year was a little bit disappointing based on what we'd seen the previous several years with Jay Harbaugh, who was elite there. Let's be honest. So JV Brown has some things to prove there too. I think these guys will help him. So there's a lot of talent back there in that defensive backfield, but there needs to be a little bit more maturity. I think these guys bring that to the table.
Yeah, I mean, football family, right? They come from an incredible football family. Their dad played at the college level, their uncle at Ole Miss as well, and then their cousin, DK Metcalf, is now on the Pittsburgh Steelers, but was the star receiver for the Seattle Seahawks for a long time. And they understand what it takes, what it looks like, the daily habits, things like that, and ultimately want to take that to the league, as TJ Metcalf told us earlier this spring. And it was a joy to talk to him about their transition. I asked him, if he realizes or one of the things that was the most appealing about coming to Michigan, that guys like Rod Moore, they make a big play in a big game, and it's the biggest play in the biggest game of the season. And, that you're on this stage. And, he said absolutely that was definitely part of it. And they want to play in the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. They want to play against the best teams in the country. And you can do that in the SEC, but the difference between Arkansas and Michigan is that you're probably going to be on one of the better teams in the country at Michigan. And I think they're excited for that. I think TJ is going to play more. I think TJ is going to potentially be the starting nickel on this team and can also play safety. And then Tevis, probably an underrated addition just because of TJ, taking a little bit more of the headlines there when you look at him being older and he's got more experience and everything. But the fact that they burned his red shirt last year at Arkansas because he was such a valuable special teams weapon and that he was in the two deep at nickel for the Razorbacks, I think bodes well for what his upside is here, that he was already showing that much early on. So two really good athletes, two guys that make that secondary one of the best in the Big Ten, and be fun to watch those two over the next couple of years because they do have multiple years left. Tevis with 3, TJ with 2. So long-term pickups, I think really important additions back in December.
Yeah, and two of I think after McCulley, weren't they the second and third commitments for Sharon Moore in this portal class? So
that sounds right.
They were a priority for them to bring in. And I know we're analyzing the fits and analyzing the guys, but I think it's also, when you do that, you look at the state of the position group. And I'll start with, TJ at safety. Rod Moore is at the top of the food chain there, but still a guy we're waiting to get fully healthy. I don't want to overstate his condition or anything like that, but we don't know how full go he'll be when the season starts or for fall camp, or maybe you guys can jump in and add some clarity on that. But
I feel better about it today than I did a couple weeks ago. And let's just put it that way, based on what we've heard. He's made a lot of progress here. So, and Rod Moore's Rod Moore, man, he's going to work for it.
Yeah. So, Rod Moore, you drop him in the top of the pecking order, but from there, I won't say there are questions. I think you have a lot of options here with guys who bring different things to the table. Like, I'm a big Brandon Hillman guy. He plays with his hair on fire, but that also means sometimes he's over pursuing plays or not where he needs to be. he's going to be in the mix to start there. I think Metcalf is going to be in the mix to start, like Clayton said, either at nickel or in one of those safety spots. Mason Curtis is a guy they're super high on. Jaden Mangum's a guy who redshirted last year, but has played at least honorable mention all Big Ten caliber of football before in this conference. So I like how, I like the room without adding TJ Metcalf, but then you drop in a guy who has starting experience in the SEC. And all of a sudden this goes from a group that I won't say it was a weakness last year. They didn't have as many options as maybe you thought you might have on paper, but they go a pretty strong 4 deep here, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And with Rod, being that guy, Rod brings everything together, right? It's more than just a great safety. It's a guy, the quarterback of the defense, right? So I feel really good with him back there, really being in control of the corners, guys who might need to grow up a little bit and be in the right spot or need some help. So yeah, I'm not worried about the safeties at all. I feel really good about them. And it's really the corners that, you've got Zeke Berry, who played there supposedly in a pinch, but I really thought that was kind of his best position last year. When you looked at the way he played down the stretch, it may not be, but the way he played, it certainly looked like it. So, and then Jair is the wild card there, Jair Hill at corner. So, but with Rod there to keep it all together, that to me is a huge factor this year, really. And again, we were a little bit concerned when we saw him just starting to run guys a few weeks ago or a month ago or so, and saying, man, boy, he really had some significant damage there. And it turns out it was 2 or 3 different things that required a second surgery, but they got it done. And again, with him out there, this is a completely different defense, in my opinion. So, but with the young guys that they have back there as well, the talent that they have back there, you've got several different guys that can play that nickel position, honestly. So, going to be fascinating to see how it all comes together and who plays where and what their best combinations are. But I have no question that will be a strength of the team.
It's crazy to think about how much better that secondary got throughout the end of last season, really the second half of the year, without very good safety play. They really didn't have it. And it turns out Makari Page's best position in that secondary was at nickel, as kind of a bigger body there, who was a good tackler throughout his career and moved him closer to the line of scrimmage. And then he's able to make some big hits, as we saw against Ohio State, and use his length and height in coverage as well. Completely different type of body than Mikey Sainristil or Zeke Berry, who were playing there before him, but it worked out. So I think to your point, Chris, they have a ton of options at what they can do. They look at, the Makari Page thing as a blueprint for what Mason Curtis can be, who's even taller and longer. And frankly, they're lucky Dusty May hasn't poached him by now with his size and athleticism. But so that would be, and Lamar Morgan said he's going to. What's that?
Right, and can even play a little bit of nickel there too, Clay, they said. So some of the guys said, which is amazing at that size.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Lamar Morgan said he's going to play there this year. And so, okay, is this just spring ball talk or, but then he was kind of predicting towards the future. So it makes you believe it a little bit more, because sometimes experiments like that get thrown out there in the off season and they don't come to fruition. But I feel like that one could. So he's, a guy that's in the mix there. And bringing in TJ Metcalf, back to the original conversation, is big, because if you're going to move a safety down to that spot, then you can kind of fill that other number at safety with him, or it ends up being TJ Metcalf as the nickel, either way. So, or Tevis, but we'll see. So just valuable additions. Great to have depth. DBs get hurt a lot, and it's good to have a lot of bodies back there.
And they cross-train these guys too. I mean, just about everybody on their roster that can play safety, they're cross-training to play nickel. Same with the corners. If you can play corner, they are training guys. There are some guys that are just going to be better for the for the boundary or for deep safety, but they try to have that crossover everywhere, because then you can get your best combinations on the field. In terms of the cornerback pecking order, so to speak, Tevis, where Tevis Metcalf fits in is kind of interesting, because I think it's kind of assumed that, you've got Jair Hill at the top, you've got Zeke Berry at the top. Shamari Earls is a guy that I think is going to be in the mix there. But then you kind of have this next tier where Caleb Anderson, we'll talk about him in a second, Tevis Metcalf, Josiah Edmond, Jeremiah Lowe, who is the guy who flashed in the spring game as well. there's kind of this, there's some good competition in that second tier, and maybe, if it's good enough competition, maybe there's guys that can push into that first tier. But any thoughts on where he fits in that sort of dynamic there?
Again, just depth, I think, and just like you said, just like you explained it, right? These are all things that are going to be figured out in fall camp, and who has, it's cliche, but whoever has great summers and whoever really puts the time in, those are the guys that are going to be favored to do more in the fall. And I remember Dave Brown, a Michigan safety, the late great Dave Brown, who played in the '70s, telling me in a "Where Are They Now" article, he said, I used to sit there at night and think, man, I could really use a pizza. But if I really want to play and be who I can be for this team, I need to be out there and running 5 miles instead. And he's saying, I know that my counterpart at Ohio State's probably doing the same thing. And I've got 4 or 5 guys here at Michigan that want my job. So it's going to be paramount that these guys who want to play put in that time. So it's hard to predict at this point. I thought Josiah Edmond played pretty well in the spring game from what I saw. But you can't put a lot of stock into one practice. That's 1 out of 15. And Jair Hill, can he be that number one? He's their most talented corner. Does he have it up here? And can he be that guy? We're going to find out. So you need to be able to trust those guys and rely on those guys. So a lot of unanswered questions, but it is good to have a talented body back there to compete.
Yeah, I'm not expecting much from Caleb Anderson this year. I think as far as like grad transfer, DBs that they've gotten over the last few years, Josh Wallace, then Amir Hall, came out at the end of the year, wasn't quite Josh Wallace. And I think Caleb Anderson maybe fits into a notch below what Amir Hall was, which was very good by the end of the season. He started to play really high level football, but Anderson wasn't necessarily a starter full time at Louisiana. He does have familiarity working with Lamar Morgan. He was his position coach for a few years there, but I think it's going to be tough for him to break into that mix, even in maybe that second tier of players that you were just talking about, Anthony, with Tevis Metcalf, Edmond, those guys in Shamari Earls is kind of the guys vying for the backup spots. So, but he's a veteran and you have the roster spot for him. So, with the familiarity there and it seemed like the inability to maybe land that big name that they went after at corner, then I don't mind taking a swing at this.
I think that's how you can kind of sum up their portal class in general, is that I think these guys are floor-raising additions, not necessarily push your ceiling forward or plug-and-play starters or anything like that. I'm with you on Caleb Anderson. I think that, he falls in that Josh Wallace, Amir Hall type of category, but if, there's a gun to my head, I'm thinking he's probably the third best of those 3, just based on accolades and how their college careers went. So we'll see if there's going to be an opportunity there. The next most interesting additions they made on defense came at defensive tackle. We know that they're losing Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant to obviously they went to the NFL draft. They're in OTAs right now with their respective teams. So you had to backfill that. Rayshawn Benny is going to move into a bigger role. A couple guys like Trey Pierce, Eno Etta in for bigger roles, but a couple other floor-raising additions in Damon Payne, a Belleville guy who comes over from Alabama, Trey Williams from Clemson, both guys who are extremely similar just in terms of college production. Now, Trey Williams has been a little more injury prone, whereas Payne has been more of just a rotational guy by trade. A lot of people seem to think that Trey Williams, if he can stay healthy, that there is that next year there for him to find, but it just hasn't happened in college yet. But both those guys, really quality additions to a defensive tackle group that's not going to be as talented as it was last year. I mean, I guess a guy like Rayshawn Benny might have something to say about that, but they're going to be, you're not going to have those guys out there playing 60, 70 snaps a game like, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant had to sometimes.
Yeah, and what John Jansen told me is Michigan's play-by-play color commentary, Gabe Tater, and obviously All-American offensive lineman here in the 90s, said that they've got several guys that pretty much do the same thing. Nobody's going to be as dominant as Mason Graham ever, probably in our lifetimes at that position. I know that's a strong statement, but I have never seen anybody in my several years on this planet dominate games like he did. He was unbelievable and the best that I've ever seen do it here. So, but you've got guys that can make a difference and that can stop the run. That's the main thing, right? Are these guys strong enough at the point of attack to stop the run? Yes, they are. I think Trey Williams has a chance to be a Kenneth Grant light type, right? Where he's not Mason Graham, but he can be maybe a half notch below a Kenneth Grant if he stays healthy. We've heard really good things about his spring. He was really bringing it. He was really hard. Once he got going, it's really hard to put up that wall and to stop him, no matter how good your technique is. This guy had a really great spring to the point that other schools we've heard were trying to poach him. Michigan probably had to up the ante a little bit in NIL money and opportunities for him to stick around. So, which is good news. So I like that line. I like the depth there. I think they did a great job addressing that. You win championships with great defensive line play, guys. You start great defense starts up front. Cliche, whatever, but that's a fact. So really like what they did there.
Yeah, Anthony, you mentioned earlier maybe like the prioritization of what Michigan went after in the transfer portal. And I mean, I think that clearly like defensive line was near or at the top of the list in terms of what they wanted to fortify in the portal this offseason because of what you lost. And luckily, no one else in the country is going to have defensive linemen like Mason Graham or Kenneth Grant either, especially Mason Graham. But I guess, there'll be great D linemen out there that'll go in the first round next year. But those two made up an incredibly special duo. Now you have a decent amount of depth. I think Rayshon Benny is much better than maybe he's getting credit for nationally and could be a breakout player in college football this year who is going to lead the charge there, and a bunch of guys you can rotate through and keep fresh, and a bunch of big bodies too. Trey Williams comes in at 6'2", 315. Damon Payne, 6'4", 313. And then you look at Trey Pierce, Eno Etta, Ike Awuna. They're all over 300 pounds. Rayshon Benny's the lightest of all of them at 296, and we know how quick his feet are and how well he moves and the strength he has too, right? 296 is not very light there, even though he's the lightest of the bunch. So I like the rotation, what those guys bring. Trey Williams, like you just hear about the personality that he has, the great fit that he is for this locker room. And Michigan has a lot of defensive linemen throughout the years with personality. Aiden Hutchinson, Chris Jenkins, I think he fits in that type of mold in terms of, the locker room type of guy. And the occasional flash play is kind of what he brought to the table at Clemson when he was healthy, including 2 sacks against Texas in this year's past year's college football playoff, right? So, he can play. He's going to play that nose guard spot, in my opinion. Damon Payne will probably play the Rayshon Benny role of years past, where he's kind of the backup 3 technique. And those are your top 3 D tackles, and I think you bring in the other depth guys from there. But it was huge to get, in terms of that top 3, right? To get 2 and 3 when you didn't have them on the roster before was massive.
And you just look at the group in general. Last year, Ike Awuna had never gotten any playing time at the college level. He comes in, he was your DT4 last year, behind Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Rayshon Benny as well. And I thought he came in and played some quality football and really kind of held his ground. And now all of a sudden he's your DT6. So not saying that he was, they have the best room in the country or anything like that, but they saw that there was a need there. They addressed it. Job well done. I think that was a big priority for them, like you said. Moving over to linebacker now, where they added one player in the transfer portal, junior Troy Bowles, who comes over from Georgia. He's also the son of Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach Todd Bowles. And he's an interesting guy, too, because he was a former top 100 recruit. I think On3 was a little bit lower on him than the consensus, but a guy who I think dealt with some injuries at Georgia. He was injured in spring ball at Michigan as well, but there's some untapped potential there. And, the thing with going to a school like Georgia is that you've got nothing but studs in the room with you. And if you're injured, you just kind of fall out of the pecking order. And, they've got some good guys ahead of them here. Obviously, Ernest Hausman's going to start. Jayshon Barham's going to start. Jimmy Rolder's kind of like that third starter for them. I think Cole Sullivan is a guy that they feel like is maybe Jayshon Barham light right now in terms of what they're able to do with him as a pass rusher, a guy that can drop back in coverage as well. But, Bowles he's a lotto ticket for sure. But I think another guy that in theme with these other additions just raises the floor of the room.
Yeah, I like the depth in this linebacker room. This is really one of the better rooms I can remember. And they've had star power, right, with the guys like Devin Bush, and you go right down the list over the years in the Harbaugh era. But in terms of depth, they're as deep as I can remember in terms of guys who could play at a high level if they all reach their potential. And I really feel like they're in a good spot. So with Bowles, I think he's got a chance, right, to really going forward to earn some time. Rolder's been injury prone. He's got to stay healthy. They love him when he's out there. The problem has been keeping him on the field. So those top three seem kind of set, but they're going to need other guys to play too. And I think this is an opportunity. So a really nice addition. Watching his film, his high school film, and everything else, you're looking at a guy who was ranked as highly as he was for a reason, right? He's got an unbelievable skill set and athleticism. So I think he makes that room deeper and maybe more.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Jean Mary seemed really excited about him when he was given his press conference this spring. And he was even asked, like, will he be healthy by fall camp? And he said, oh, yeah, he's not that good where we would have just taken him, if we knew he was going to miss, like a whole season or whatever. They feel like he can contribute. And I think that they're high on him. I think he's undersized at 6 foot, 220. That was one of the issues that hurt him at Georgia, where you bring in a bunch of other guys who were ready to play in his class and then actually got passed over by guys in the following class, last year's freshmen on their depth chart. He's only played 46 defensive snaps in college football. This will essentially be, the start of his career whenever he gets on the field for Michigan. So we'll see, right? Can he compete with Cole Sullivan and Jimmy Rolder for 2 deep snaps? Or is he going to be behind them and have to wait for Ernest Hausman and Jayshawn Barham to leave to kind of emerge and earn a role? I think that's the big question for me when it comes to Troy Bowles this season. But either way, there's an opportunity there because Hausman and Barham are gone after this year, and they need somebody to slide in. So the fact that he may have a year, even if he doesn't get a lot of time to develop and get ready for 2026, I think that is really nice. And I think they've done a good job building that room up for not just the here and now, but the future. You can kind of see what the progression is for some of these guys, including Nathaniel Owusu Boateng, who was a big win back in the December signing day in the freshman class. So you're seeing that young talent blending with some of the veteran guys who are coming back.
Yeah, I think obviously with Bowles, like you said, it's a little more of a long-term play. Ernest Hausman, Jayshawn Barham, those are guys who are probably in the NFL this time next year. They're both seniors, so I believe their eligibility will be out anyway. So it's really, you're kind of setting up your room for what that next wave is and who sort of establishes themselves as the leader of the pack in that next wave. I think it's kind of an interesting storyline to monitor throughout this season.